So we're going to be using Tiny Task. It's just a keylogger and it's really easy to use. Hit the record button, click whatever keys you want, and then you can hit the play button, and it's just going to do that as long as you want. There's a link to download Tiny Task in the description, and then there's also a link to a video that explains Tiny Task really well if you haven't used it before. So for Rocket, the only move that really works well is the Z ability, but you can kind of use the X as well. Then moving over to Spin, the Z ability is very good, and so is the C ability. Blade's kind of weird because you can only use the M1, but it's pretty strong, so you get mastery relatively quick. Spring's pretty hard to AFK, only the Z ability works. Bomb's pretty weird because you have to be using the lay accessory to AFK it. The V ability works very well though, it's a lot of damage. Smoke is an elemental, so I'd recommend AFKing it at the Ice Cream Island. The X is always really good, and the C and Z are kind of weird. Spike is such a bad fruit. You can only use the X ability and it doesn't do very much damage. Flame is a bit different. The Z and X ability work really well, and then the C and V are kind of wonky. Flame is also an elemental, which definitely helps with the AFKing. Then Awaken Flame is a little bit easier to AFK as the V ability works even better. Moving on to Falcon, it's also so hard to AFK. The X ability is the only one that works. Falcon's very bad. Anyways, moving over to Ice, it is so easy to AFK. Every single move works. When you awaken Ice, it's the same thing, but you're going to get a little bit more damage. Every single move works here as well. Remember, Ice is also an elemental fruit. Next up is Sand, and because it's an elemental, you can AFK it pretty well. The V ability is definitely the best one to use on here. And Awaken Sand, it looks literally the exact same. Dark is another elemental fruit, and the Z ability is the best one here. When you awaken Dark, the Z ability is actually really bad. Don't use it anymore. And then the other three are okay. Diamond's so easy to AFK. The V ability is very strong, and the other three are also quite good. Just make sure you don't use the M1s. Then we got Light, another elemental fruit, and the M1s are super useful here. The Z ability is like kind of mid. I'm not gonna lie, it's not that good. When you awaken Light, the moveset's a little bit better for AFKing, and it's a little bit easier. So Rubber's kind of weird. The M1 works, but not very well. It's too much knockback, and that's the same thing for the Z ability. The C ability does work though. Barrier is very bad for AFKing. Yeah. Ghost is a bit different because the X and C ability both work really well. Magma is super solid for AFKing. The Z ability is great, and so is the C and V. The X ability is a bit off, but whatever. It's an elemental fruit, so it's really easy to AFK. Now somehow Awakened Magma is a little bit worse for AFKing, so that's kind of a bummer. Now Quake is the best AFK fruit in the game. You can fully wipe out pretty much any island because the waves on Quake's V are so big. When you awaken it, it gets a little bit better, and again, just spamming the V ability is so strong on Quake. Buddha Unawakened is pretty bad for AFKing, so instead make sure you awaken it, and then you can use the V on Awakened Buddha. Now the interesting thing is you can kind of transformation spam for a little bit more damage, but I wouldn't really recommend it. I don't think it's that ideal. Transformation spamming is like really hard to set up on the macro. Then Love, in my opinion, is the second best AFK fruit. Now Love is a bit more complicated, but you can use it to AFK pirate raids, which makes it super good. That's how I got it to max mastery, and I also got tons of fruits while I was doing it. Anyways, moving over to Spider, overall it's a pretty good AFK fruit. The Z, X, and V all work pretty well, but the Awakened version, everything works. It's like really solid, surprisingly. Then Sound is surprisingly easy to AFK. The C ability has so much AoE, you can hit like 3-4 NPCs, like it's just amazing. Phoenix is kind of miserable. It might be one of the worst fruits to AFK, and then once you transform, it's the exact same. It's still a horrible moveset. Thankfully there's an awakening, so once you awaken it, the Z, X, and F all work pretty well. Then when you use Awaken Phoenix and the transformation, the Z and X ability are the ones that work. Moving on to Portal, and it's just as bad. The X ability is the only one I would recommend using, but you can use the V. Rumble is solid, it's an elemental, so the Z and X are going to work really well, but you can still also use the C and the V ability. Awakened Rumble gets even better as the V ability switches from a meh to a good, and of course you get higher damage from awakenings. Now Pain surprised me here. It's got 3 good abilities, and then the C ability is a little bit weird. It does way too much knockback, so I don't think I would really recommend using the C ability. You're going to get plenty of damage with the V, X, and Z. Then we got Blizzard, one of the goats for AFKing. Now if you look at Blizzard's moveset here, it looks overall pretty bad. There's a lot of red, but the V ability has so much AoE. That's the entire reason why I use Blizzard. It's very, very strong. And now we're finally at the mythic fruits. Gravity is pretty mid. So the X ability works for AFKing, but the Z ability is a little bit whack. Then on T-Rex without a transformation, overall it's pretty bad. I don't think T-Rex is a very good AFK fruit. Now I also put transformation in yellow because you can kind of spam the transformation a little bit, but it's not way too strong. So Mammoth overall is pretty bad. Once you get your transformation on, the M1s are the way to go. You're going to get a pretty good amount of mastery from that. Doe's also an elemental, so the Z works, the X works, and so does the V. The X kind of throws around the NPC though, so if you're a little bit laggy, it might not work very well. Then once you awaken Doe, the M1 is kind of bad. Honestly, it's really disappointing. The Z ability switches from a good ability to a bad one because it can knock you back. The X ability is pretty good, and then the V ability is very, very strong. Shadow is kind of weird. The X ability is the only one that works, but I found a really good AFK method on it. You have to glitch into a house, and then you can use the V ability. It's really weird, but it works. Venom is really solid on AFKing. The Z, X, and C are all really nice. They do a lot of damage. Once you get the transformation down, all three of those abilities work just as good, but it's a little bit more AoE. Switching over to control, it sucks for AFKing. I don't think it's worth your time. I think just wait for the rework and then AFK farm it. Then we got gas. It's also an elemental, but unfortunately you can't use the M1s on it. You can use the X, C, and transformation spam V, but instead it's a lot more worth your time to use Z, X, and C while transformed. Once again, you can transformation spam on gas, but it's just not that good. I don't think it's worth it. Now we got Spirit, and it's the contender for one of the worst AFK fruits. The M1s are the only thing you can use, and all they do is spawn creepy trees and mushrooms. Then on Leopard, all of the moves are bad except for the transformation. So transformation spamming Leopard's actually kind of good. Once you actually transform Leopard fully, you can use the M1s, and that's the only way you're going to be able to AFK Leopard. And Yeti is not that good either. The Z, X, and V are all kind of bad. Once you transform Yeti, the X ability works a little bit better, and the Z is still kind of bad. The transformation spam on Yeti isn't too bad. I feel like this is probably one of the best fruits to try and do transformation spamming on. Now we got Kitsune, and the C ability works really well, and the Z ability is a little bit weird. Now, I put the transformation in yellow, like you can use it. But I'm gonna be honest, it is an awful transformation spam fruit. Now once you actually transform Kitsune, it gets a little bit worse, honestly. I feel like it's easier to AFK without the transformation. The C ability is the only good one that's going to work here. Now what you've all been waiting for is Dragon. Unfortunately, it sucks for AFK. Overall, the regular moveset looks pretty bad. Then Dragon V2 is pretty much the exact same, not very good. Once you do the West transformation, it switches up. Dragon suddenly becomes pretty solid for AFKing. The C and Z work pretty well, and the M1 and X both kind of work. Then on Eastern Dragon, it's just worse. Like, how can anybody say that Eastern is better than Western, dude? Anyways, the Z ability is the only good thing going for East. Everything else is kind of bad. The only way that you can actually AFK East with the C ability is you need to have your head hitting a wall, and that's a little bit complicated, so I wouldn't recommend trying that. And there we go, pretty easy. That's all the fruits there in the game.